and there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another incredible installment from very high above all the puerile and insipid bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Wednesday. It is an incredible day on the program. Once again, I'm sitting on top of the of all Wyoming media. You know, there have been so many records that have been broken by Cowboy State Politics that it's really hard to keep track of them. I mean, it is by far the most listened to podcast in the entire state of Wyoming. And let me just provide some definitions for you real quick. So a podcast, in my humble opinion, or not so humble as the case may be, a podcast is another form of media. And it's one that is entirely unique from all of the others in that it is not a nightly news broadcast. It is not a radio show. Though, if you listen to Cowboy State Politics, I've gone to great lengths to make it seem like it is a radio show. Now, of course, we're listening on the Independence Network, and I'm broadcasting live on Facebook and on X and YouTube and Rumble. And so, yes, it does have the feel of a live radio show. But the podcast, hold on just a second. But the podcast is something different entirely. It is original content 3 times a week on Cowboy State Politics, and every single episode is different. Now, there are radio shows that they record their show and then they publish it to what I call a podcast, but really, that's just a mass media, another form of mass media that they can distribute the content that has already been recorded. And so literally, the way a podcast works is through what is called an RSS feed. It stands for Real Simple Syndication. And so different services around the internet like iTunes or iHeartRadio or Amazon Music or all of those, they pick up different RSS feeds, and each podcast has its own. So every time that there's an update, it automatically updates on their service. So when you have like these radio broadcasts or other programs that they're just republishing content from somewhere else, I don't really consider that a podcast. It's very different from Cowboy State Politics, and I think different in a very important way. And so anyway, there has been 750 episodes of Cowboy State Politics, an incredible number. And in fact, I think that this calls for a little celebration. That's right, 750 episodes and over 300,000 downloads. By far, the biggest podcast in the state of Wyoming. And if you think I'm taking this too far, I'm not, because really this is a celebration of you. I couldn't do any of this without the very loyal listeners of Cowboy State Politics. So thank you for being a fan. Thank you for listening. I cannot tell you how big of a place in my heart that you all take up. When I started this program, I never really thought, and I guess I never really considered what was going to happen when I started talking to you each and every day. And I never thought that I would miss being able to talk to you. And then, 4 or 5 episodes into it, I was like, wow, this is something totally different. Haven't experienced this yet. But I'm telling you, my friends, when I am away from this microphone, I miss you. And I thank you for listening to the program. Thank you for doing your research. Thank you for doing your own homework. And most of all, thank you for taking it out and using it at the polling locations, using it at your meetings, being the people that research and know what the heck you're talking about. So anyway, thank you very much. 750 episodes. That's a big, big number, and I can't be more excited. So on with today's program. We're going to do something a little bit different here. Today, I have a great interview with United States Representative Harriet Hageman, and I'm going to play that in about 20 minutes on the program. I'm just going to play it straight through. And so we're going to talk for the next 20 minutes, and then I'll go ahead and play the interview, and that'll be today's program. We spoke with her before the election, and I mean, there wasn't really a lot of prediction that was going on there, but anyway, now it's after the election, and so it's kind of a juxtaposition. So you can listen to the first one and then listen to the interview today, and you can see if anything changed. And if whatever stayed the same. And anytime I get to talk to Representative Hageman, it's a real treat for me. And so I'm super happy that we're able to do it on our 750th episode of Cowboy State Politics. So anyway, let's get to some of the news before we get to the interview. And I have been enjoying to the nth degree all of the appointments that are coming out of the Trump administration, or what will be the new Trump administration. And some of them just make me giggle with glee. This one in particular. Trump announces new role for Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in the Department of Government Efficiency. Now, this, of course, is going to be some sort of new department. We don't have a lot of details on it, but I bet it's going to include a whole bunch of cutting and a whole bunch of not spending. And I quote, President-elect Donald Trump announced on Tuesday night that he has tapped business magnate and former pharmaceutical executive Vivek Ramaswamy. And actually, I don't know that he's entirely a pharmaceutical representative. I'll do some research on that. But I know that he's big in the medical industry. Anyway, to lead his Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE Department, D-O-G-E. Quote, I am pleased to announce that the great Elon Musk, working in conjunction with American patriot Vivek Ramaswamy, will lead the Department of Government Efficiency, Trump said in a statement. Together, these two wonderful Americans will pave the way for my administration to dismantle government bureaucracy, slash excess regulations, cut wasteful expenditures, and restructure federal agencies, essential to the Save America movement. Trump called the initiative, which Musk had first floated during an interview with Trump earlier this year, the Manhattan Project of our time, naming the department Doge as a wink to a popular meme and cryptocurrency sometimes referenced by Elon Musk. Quote, this will send shockwaves through the system, and anyone involved with government waste, which is a lot of people, Musk said. Quote, to drive this kind of drastic change, the Department of Government Efficiency will provide advice and guidance from outside of government and will partner with the White House and the Office of Management and Budget to drive large-scale structural reform and create an entrepreneurial approach to government never seen before. This is absolutely incredible. Now, it's not incredible that there are some business people that want to cut wasteful spending. The lovely Christine and I, we're still working on our salon, which, by the way, just to give you an update on that, it's going to be ready here pretty soon. We're pretty excited in it. But anyway, we were having a conversation last night that if you are a private business person, you have to be able to monetize like each part of your little space. And so let me give you an example. And with our salon, right? We were deciding where the stations were going to go, what we could do with a certain space. Is it going to be product? Is it going to be used for a service? What about the extra room? Are we going to use that for a store? Is that going to be, another a masseuse or a nail tech? Or I'm learning a lot about this whole salon business, if you hadn't noticed, my friends. But anyway, the point was we're talking about monetization and increasing revenues and decreasing costs. And let me give you another example with Cowboy state politics. It takes a lot of money to be able to run a podcast, well, the way that I'm doing it now. Originally, when I started the show, it was with a $60 microphone, the computer I already had sitting on my kitchen table. And I always got a kick out of, hey, you must have an incredible studio. It sounds awesome. Well, it's actually my kitchen table, and it always gave me a big kick. But there was a lot you could do with just a microphone and a computer. Well, since then, I've expanded, and the program has expanded. We have the Independence Network now. I've got video streaming, so there's video equipment. I've got more stuff on the way. And so you continually expand. Well, the space that all of that works in needs to be maximized, right? You have to monetize the space that you have. And so the trick is to be able to make the most use out of the space that you have. Now, compare that to government. For a long time, government has had unlimited space, unlimited money, and there was no need to cut wasteful spending. There was no need to decrease waste because you have an endless supply of money. Now you have two big-time business people running the DOGE department, the Department of Government Efficiency, and they're going to be looking for places to cut spending and maximize revenue. And that doesn't mean increase taxes. What that means is to decrease overhead. If you decrease the amount of overhead that you're paying, well, then the profit margin is going to, the profit margin actually won't go up, but the amount of money that's going out the door is going to go down. So essentially you have more disposable income at your fingertips without increasing taxes. So anyway, I'm super excited about Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy being part of this Department of Government Efficiency. I've liked Vivek for a long time. In fact, I've been trying really hard to get an interview with him. I'm hopeful that we'll be able to pull that off sometime in the near future. But to get a hold of some of these guys, it takes a lot. Well, anyway, I was digging through the Sound Bites archive here at Cowboy State Politics, which, by the way, I have to tell you is immense. And I came upon a Vivek soundbite, and I really have no idea what it is. So we're just going to kind of roll the dice, and it's Vivek Ramaswamy, so it can't be bad, right? It has to be actually good. So here is the soundbite entitled Vivek the Media, and we have no idea what it is. And I should have got a dice rolling soundbite so we could play that. But anyway, here we go.
Think about who's moderating this debate. This should be Tucker Carlson, Joe Rogan, and Elon Musk. We'd have 10 times the viewership, asking questions that GOP primary voters actually care about and bringing more people into our party. You think the Democrats, we've got Kristen Welker here, you think the Democrats would actually hire Greg Gutfeld to host a Democratic debate? They wouldn't do it. And so the fact of the matter is, Kristen, I'm going to use this time because this is actually about you in the media and the corrupt media establishment. Ask you, the Trump-Russia collusion hoax that you pushed on this network for years, was that real or was that Hillary Clinton made up disinformation? Answer the question. Go.
Mr. Roberts.
This is how we get our country back. We need accountability because this media rigged the 2016 election. They rigged the 2020 election with the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Mr. Ramaswamy,
and they're going to rig this election.
Your time is up.
Accountability.
Let me turn to
Mr. Ramaswamy, your time is up. You can't be accusing us who are in our ivory tower of doing anything untoward. No, can't accuse us of anything. But that is exactly what you can expect from the DOGE department. Vivek and Elon Musk, two guys that are going to take it to the establishment. And this is, and it's not going to hit home for a lot of these government bureaucracies until Trump drops the first hammer on them. Hey, Elon and Vivek say I ought to get rid of this. Okay, clunk, it's done. And it won't hit home until that actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won't realize the perilous situation that they're in until it actually happens. The bureaucrats in the deep state won until the first hammer drops. And after that, you are going to see a flood of disinformation in the media. Now, I hate using that word because it's used against us all the time. But when the media lies to you, that is, by definition, disinformation. It is indoctrination. It is propaganda. Find any term that you want, but you will see a flood from the media. Which, by the way, did y'all hear the story about the Communist News Network and PMS NBC about to face significant layoffs? Yeah, one of them that cracked me up is that at CNN, hosts are actually going to have to do some work. So I don't know if you realize this or not, but most TV programs that you see, even some of them on Fox, they don't do their own writing. Yep, they have a teleprompter there, and somebody else writes their program for them. The only thing they do is sit up there and deliver it. Well, at CNN, there's going to be some layoffs because their ratings are in the toilet and nobody wants to listen to their bull crap. And so, to maximize revenues, to decrease costs, like I was talking about at the beginning of the show, apparently hosts are going to actually have to do some research. And they're going to have to write their own monologues. And they're going to have to do some actual work instead of just flap their gums. And I don't know that I've talked about this, certainly not recently, but it takes a tremendous amount of work to put together a show. For every hour of content that I do, which most of my podcasts are not an hour, the live show, it's a little bit different because it flows a little bit easier. And you just take the day's news and go through it. But for an hour of content, I spend about 3 hours prepping for it. And just think, if you're going to write an hour-long speech, which most monologues are not an hour, but if you were, you're talking about a tremendous amount of preparation work. And so, at the Communist News Network, and the hosts are going to have to start doing their own writing. That should be pretty interesting to see what they come up with and how bad it actually is. And let me tell you how that thing is going to roll out. Hosts are going to have to write their own monologue. It's going to suck because the only thing that they're not so good at is telling a story on TV. And then they're going to get fired because their content is terrible. See, perfect example. And another one in Wyoming, great example. I don't know if you've listened to the Cowboy's morning show. Oh, my God. You know, for a guy who he claimed, one of his first episodes, he claims that the Cowboy, well, I think the Cowboy is pretty conservative and, we're pretty well down the middle. Have you read anything that has been written by Trotsky Wolfson to be able to claim that that's down the middle? Absolutely ridiculous. By the way, if you listen to the morning show, Trotsky is out there telling you mistruths again. There's an article about the Senate and House leadership, and it's littered with things that aren't correct. I don't think in this case that Trotsky set out to tell a lie, but he certainly didn't get a lot of stuff correct. So anyway, that's what the media does, and I think that this Doge department that Elon and Vivek are going to be manning, I think it's going to be absolutely incredible, and I cannot wait for the first press release. It's going to be absolutely amazing. Well, let's see here. We've got about 10 minutes, about 8 minutes before we're going to go to the Harriet Hageman interview. So I guess we should probably get a word in from our sponsors. And interestingly enough, it is this program is driven by the listeners and by the generous sponsors of Cowboy State Politics. They're what make this thing work. You and the people who can actually monetize it. So here we go. Here is an insane profit timeout. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a selection of better news, entertainment, and commentary than right here on the Independence Network, with great voices like Joey Carenti from Just Blame Joey, Ken Pendergraft from The Ramble-Roon, Tom Kelly from Wide Right Turn, and the lovely Christine from The Hair Affair. And of course, my program, Cowboy State Politics, Wyoming's most listened to political program. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program. Sitting high atop the Wyoming media, this is Cowboy State Politics, and I am your illustrious host, the guy that started this program, David Iverson, Wyoming's conservative voice. You know, one thing that that I try to keep real, how do I want to put this? I try to keep track of is, you know, how many listeners to Cowboy State Politics do we have on any given day? And I can tell you for a fact that there are a ton of people that pay attention to this program. Some of them enjoy it. Some of them, they're just listening for different things that I say that they could probably attack me with, but whatever. We've got about 4 minutes left until the Harriet Hageman interview. So let's see if we can do this little article. It's entitled, MAGA is Pissing Off Republicans with Its Push for a Senate Leader. So the very first thing that Mitch McConnell did after Donald Trump was elected president was he set about to find somebody to replace him that was absolutely a never-Trumper. And in John Cornyn and John Thune, he found exactly that. Well, this article, and I quote, with Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on his way out, the MAGA power play amid the fight for Senate leadership is starting to rub some Republicans the wrong way. After 17 years in the hot seat, McConnell is expected to exit his post at the top of Senate Republican leadership on Wednesday, ending his run as the longest-serving Senate party leader in U.S. history. At the top of the billing to replace the 82-year-old is South Dakota Senator John Thune and Texas Senator John Cornyn. Both of them are never Trumpers, by the way. Two establishment conservatives and longtime McConnell allies who have not always seen eye to eye with the president-elect. Meanwhile, a gamut of Trump's key allies, including Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson, RFK Jr., Vivek Ramaswamy, and Charlie Kirk, are aggressively lobbying for Florida Senator Rick Scott to take the helm. Trump, notably, has so far avoided endorsing any of the contenders. But the overzealous pressure campaign, which is also being pushed along by some far-right social media influencers and their harassment tactics, is on the verge of combusting, according to Politico. That's because most of the Senate Republicans conference won't have to face re-election until 2028 or later. On top of that, the vote is by secret ballot, ensuring that no one from their constituents to MAGA's top brass will know if they voted for or against Trump's candidate. Quote, senators do not take kindly to having an army of social media trolls attack them, one unnamed aide told Politico on Sunday, noting that the effort was only, quote, pissing off senators whose votes for Rick needs to win. The reason why all of these Senate Republicans, these establishment idiots, are ticked off is because they know that American citizens spoke loudly and clearly, and there's no doubt whatsoever that what the mandate is. Conservative Republicans took the presidency, the House, and the Senate. And it's those longtime Senate Republicans that are trying to push back that we can't get away from business as usual. Things have to be run exactly as they were, as they always have been. Well, that is exactly the reason why the election turned out the way that it is, because Americans, both Democrats, and you're going to hear me and Harriet talk about this in just a minute. I'm actually a little bit less than a minute, that it was a lot of people who have never voted that voted for Trump. Some Democrats voted for Trump. In fact, Trump gained in every constituency that we track over the 2020 election. So there had to have been a whole bunch of people that voted for him that didn't before. So Harriet and I talk about that for a little bit. So coming up here in about 30 seconds, I'm going to hit the old play button, and we're just going to listen to the interview with Harriet Hageman. I think that there's a break in the middle, but anyway, let's go ahead and get set up to do this. And so here is my interview with United States Representative Harriet Hageman. I'd like to welcome to the program, after the election, our amazing Congresswoman, Harriet Hageman. Harriet, how you feeling today?
Well, I'm feeling very good. There's a lot to celebrate.
Oh, man. I said on the program this morning that we're still a week out of the election, and it still doesn't exactly feel real. It's kind of like in my world, it'd be like buying a new motorcycle. You park it in the driveway and you get up in the morning and it's still brand new and you don't really believe that you have it quite yet. But I am ecstatic.
I will tell Donald Trump when I see him next time that you liken him or compare him to a new motorcycle. I think he will like that.
Well, in my world, man, if I had a brand new Harley sitting out there, I'd be over the moon. Well, Harriet, we spoke before the election. I had a couple of questions for you, and the first one was, do you think this is going to be a fair election, and if so, are you prepared? So my question for you now is, again, do you think the election was fair? Did you see any irregularities? Were there any problems anywhere? What did you see?
So I think that there were irregularities. I think there were a couple of things that happened. One was, as they say, his win had to be too big to rig. And I think that in part happened. I think that the number of new voters that President Trump brought in, as well as getting Democrats and independents to swing his way, I think was absolutely huge. We saw a couple of things that happened, especially early on the election day. Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, for example, sought to exclude Republican poll watchers, which was illegal. And the RNC, they had their attorneys ready to go immediately. They arrived on scene, and at that point, they both relented. And in those particular places, we were able to have the Republican poll watchers. We saw before the election, there were situations where people were finding ballots, for example, or there was a couple of ballot drop boxes that were set on fire, which I think is something that our clerks in our states need to be thinking about, whether there could be potentially vandalism against these. Right now, down in Arizona, you have the ACLU that sought to extend the deadline by which they could cure ballots. And my position is that the longer you're curing ballots, the reason they're needing to be cured is because they are they're not legitimate ballots. They have wrong addresses. They have wrong signatures because they're not legitimate ballots.
Right, they're fraudulent in some way.
They're fraudulent. And so under Arizona law, they had to cure all ballots by Saturday, and the ACLU sought to extend that, and the court rejected it. But if you're still trying to cure ballots 5 days after the election, you're not curing ballots. You're trying to find a way to count fraudulent ballots. And then you have to always look at that slimy Mark Elias, the guy who is notorious for stealing elections and doing everything he can to undermine election integrity. And, he's raised his ugly head a couple of times post-election to try to put the finger on the scale of the Democrats. But to my knowledge, they have called the race from the standpoint of the Republicans will be holding the House. So we right now have all three, the presidency, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, and we better deliver.
Oh, well, and that's one of the points I mentioned on my program this morning, is that you have the clean sweep. You can pretty much do anything that you want, and there's no excuse for not delivering now. I mean,
Well, I'm going to put some guardrails on that because we still have the 60 vote requirement for legislation in the Senate, other than what we can get through on reconciliation. And with reconciliation, it has to be budget oriented and or financially oriented. So we will be, and I will be working with Steve Scalise, the majority floor leader, and we are already putting together a package of financial bills, tax bills, that sort of thing, that we're going to send over immediately to the Senate that we believe should and could and will pass muster under reconciliation. My task is really focused on what you always hear me talk about, which is regulatory and administrative reform. But there are some things that I believe will meet the requirements of reconciliation. So we might be able to get a good package of bills through within the first 30 days after January 1.
do you think that you'll have the 12 budgetary bills ready for Donald Trump when he walks in the office? I mean, are you going to have them all lined up and ready to go?
No, I wish I could say that we would. I wish I could say that we did our job, but we didn't. And I think they're going to try to shove an omnibus down our throats. And I am mad about that for a lot of reasons. We have, in the House of Representatives, we have passed either 5 or 7 of our budget bills. But in terms of percentage, our budget bills actually fund 74% of the government. So they were the big ones. And if the Senate were to take them up, we actually could have 74% of our government funded through next fiscal year. And if we had to do an omnibus, it would only be on the 26% of the government that we haven't passed the appropriations bills for. But I just, right now they're going through orientation for freshmen. This week we're doing elections for leadership. And I just think that they're going to try to do an omnibus spending bill against us again. And the question becomes, how big is it? And does it take away all of Donald Trump's power for the first year? That's the question.
Yeah, that's a big question. And there's several different pieces out today. The establishment Republicans plan to kind of thwart the Trump agenda. And I mean, I guess maybe let's talk about that for a minute. We have a leadership vote coming up in the Senate. What's your feeling on that one?
I don't know. I don't really have an answer to that. I think in a lot of ways, in some ways, well, I work with our senators, and on specific policy issues, I will definitely, jump on board with Rand Paul and Mike Lee on a variety of things. But they don't really get involved in our leadership, and we don't necessarily get involved in theirs. What's going to happen on Wednesday? I cannot answer it. I just don't know. I would like to see new blood. I guess I'll put it that way.
Oh, I think that's fair enough. And interestingly enough, we've got a very similar situation in the Wyoming Senate they've got a leadership vote coming up on the 20th, and I have no idea how that's going to go. So,
I don't either. I have talked to a variety of people, and I just can't handicap that one at all. I can't quite figure out what people are looking to do.
I really hope that, as far as Wyoming is concerned, well, I guess this applies to the federal government too, that I really hope that we don't squander the opportunity that voters have given us. In Wyoming, they delivered a decisive conservative vote, and the same could be said for, the Senate, the House, and the presidency. You've got all 3 branches right now. So, and
don't mess it up.
Don't mess it up. I noticed one thing that was kind of interesting is that, and I think that a lot of people take this for granted, that Wyoming actually increased the margin by which Trump won. And it was big last time around, but it was even bigger this time. What do you attribute that to? I figured every red-blooded Republican in Wyoming was voting for Donald Trump in 2020, and yet he got more votes this time.
So I think that what you can say for the last several election cycles in Wyoming is that we are a 70-30 state. I think that when you look at our federal elections, because that's the statewide elections, I think that you can see how it plays out. And I think that the last several election cycles since at least 2016 has shown that Wyoming is 70-30. Now, Donald Trump did a little bit better than that this time. He was up at, I think, pretty close to 75%. Now, what's interesting is if you look at my votes, I was right at 70%, but I have about 7,000 undervotes, and John Barrasso had about 1,000 to 1,500, or excuse me, 6,000 to 6,500 undervotes, and President Trump only had like 1,500 undervotes, meaning there were people who walked in that voting booth and they voted for Donald Trump, and I don't think they voted for anybody down ticket. Wow. So these are, in my opinion, I believe that we've got a lot of new voters that have come into the party that have been swayed by his message and who also recognize the train wreck of the Biden-Harris administration and how bad Kamala Harris would have been for Wyoming. And they came in and they may have only marked out one box and then walked back out, because you look at that at the undervotes, I don't think that they're necessarily out of the norm. But when you look at the top three federal officials that were running, President Trump, myself, and Senator Barrasso, there's a huge difference in the undervotes. And I think that those votes probably just voted for Donald Trump.
We'll get back to the program in just a second. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. I'd love to be able to say that this is the 750th outrageous profit timeout, but that's not exactly true. I ran this program for a long time and didn't bring a single dollar in the front door, but this time, totally different. Here we go. This 750th episode extravaganza is brought to you by Morton Buildings. They've been with me almost since the very beginning. They're an amazing company with amazing people, and it just so happens they're the experts in metal building construction. There's a big difference between the work that Morton Buildings does and other companies, and you can tell it right as you drive by one of their buildings. The construction, the design, the paint, they just look better. And the stuff that you can't see on the inside is way more important. One cool thing they do is they pour concrete pillars and then insert a steel I-beam inside them, and then pour the foundation on top. And that way, it is not possible for water to get underneath your foundation and ruin it. So if you're thinking about a building for your property, I highly recommend that you contact Nick and Jesse at Morton Buildings. The phone number is 307-674-2532, or you can check them out at their website, mortonbuildings.com. Do you know that the dollar has lost over 65% of its purchasing power in the last 20 years? No matter who's in the Oval Office, its value keeps slipping. That's why so many people are turning to gold and silver, real assets that hold their value. This year alone, gold and silver are up nearly 30%. In fact, gold is up 600% and silver 400% over the last 2 decades, proving to be a smart and long-term choice. Freedom Gold USA makes it easy to protect your wealth. With 30 years of experience, they'll help you diversify your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or deliver it right to your door. They stand out with unmatched honesty, guaranteed lowest prices, free insured shipping, and a no-fee buyback, bonus silver on qualifying orders, and a top-rated reputation. Plus, as a proud supporter of Cowboy State Politics, Freedom Gold is offering Cowboy State Politics listeners a chance to win up to $250 worth of silver simply by requesting a free consultation or investment guide to learn more. There's no purchase necessary. So take control of your financial future. Visit freedomgoldusa.com/David or call 888-305-8907 and tell them that David sent you. The Wyoming Cartridge Company makes quality ammunition that is designed to make you a better shooter. They're based right here in Sheridan, Wyoming, and every single round that leaves their Sheridan, Wyoming factory is inspected by no less than 4 people. You're not going to get that type of quality control from any of their competitors. So the next time you're thinking of going out and going shooting, pick up a box of Wyoming Cartridge Company ammunition. I promise you, you are not going to be disappointed. Have you ever spent a lot of time crafting a heartfelt letter to the editor only to have it rejected by the newspaper? Have you ever helped a friend proofread their op-ed only to realize that it never got published? Wyoming Unpublished has decided to stop letting the biased news outlets control the public narrative. They want to post your letters to the editor, your opinion pieces, and cartoons that other outlets won't touch. Wyoming Unpublished is looking for real letters on issues that matter most to Wyoming residents. Here's the rules. Please forward the piece that you initially sent to the Cowboy, the Casper Star Tribune, or others news outlets to wyomingunpublished@gmail.com. Wyoming Unpublished will try hard to post your piece along with your name, town, date, and the outlet that rejected you. Let's stop letting activist journalists tell you what is important to you. Wyoming Unpublished is just getting started, and they would love to hear from you. And now, let's get back to our interview with Harriet Hageman. You know, in any other place, a couple thousand undervotes would not be statistically significant, but in Wyoming, I think that it is.
It is when you think about. I think that my record has demonstrated that I am quite conservative, and quite aligned with the majority of people in Wyoming. The majority, and I get that one. That's the feedback that I get when I come home. People say how proud they are of the work that I've been doing, and that they are so glad I didn't come back to Washington D.C. and just turn into somebody else. That I have continued to carry out exactly the policy that I said I would when I ran. That I am the same person today as Harriet Hageman that I was 3 or 4 years ago. I really haven't changed, and I feel very good about that. That's my intent. I don't want to come here and become a different person. That isn't why I ran for this office. But obviously there is a segment of the conservatives out there that aren't voting for me, but they did vote for Donald Trump. And I think that's actually a really good sign. I think what the Republicans need to do is make sure that we are actually looking at those votes, trying to figure that out, and trying to bring them into the party so that they are more active up and down the ticket.
I wouldn't quote this guy very often, but Rod Miller had an interesting piece in his last opinion column, and basically it was the voters have spoken. And I think if you look nationwide, Trump gained in just about every constituency that we even track, and which means, you know, minorities, women, men, and I think that what that tells you is that there were a lot of people that normally would not vote for Republicans voted for Donald Trump. I find that absolutely amazing.
Well, and I think it gives us a huge opportunity. When we see things like that, we need to figure them out and understand it so that we can continue to tap into that group. You know, my sister Rachel always said one of the reasons why the Republicans really needed to focus on what Donald Trump was saying and doing was because he was bringing new people into the party. He was giving people a voice who perhaps had believed for much of their adult life that they didn't have a voice in politics. And so they didn't engage. They weren't voting at any elections. They are the 30 to 40% who may not have voted for 10 years or 20 years, or the ones who say, oh, I don't vote, my vote doesn't count. They never change anything. They're just going to do what they want to do anyway. And I think that what Rachel, the point that she was making was he gave voice to the voiceless.
Yes.
And I think that we as leaders, as political leaders, as in a republic especially, we need to be cognizant of what they're saying in that regard and think, okay, you know, I don't say we have to get everybody out to vote just for the sake of getting people out to vote. I want them to be informed voters, but they're only informed voters if they care. They're only informed voters if they think that I'm going to come back here and actually care about them and pursue an agenda that is in their best interest, not my best interests. And that is, again, when you see Donald Trump in a McDonald's apron, when you see him riding in a garbage truck, I know Donald Trump, and he is this billionaire guy, and people think I can't relate to him. He is one of the more relatable people that I have encountered in politics because he truly cares about people. In some ways, he reminds me of my father. My father always really cared about people, and that was why people were drawn to him. And Donald Trump is the same way. And I think if we're going to be successful as the Republican Party, as conservatives who want to fix this country, as people who really do believe in the promise of our forefathers, we have to make sure that we are consistently talking to and engaging with everybody. And sometimes it's those people we haven't reached before that I think Donald Trump has given us that pathway.
The first time he ran for office, I really wasn't all that enthused about his candidacy. I mean, of course, I've always been a Republican, and I'm never going to vote for, a Democrat, or I hope I'm not going to vote for a Democrat. But one of the things that I always liked about him from the very beginning is I could watch one of his speeches, and it rang true with what I was thinking, and it was almost thank God somebody's finally saying what I've been thinking all along. And that's Donald Trump all the way around.
Recently I saw an interview with him. And when you deal with politics all the time and you deal with politicians, they get up on the stage and they don't really talk a lot about policy. I try to talk about what we're doing, why we're doing it, what the bills are, what they would do, what I'm trying to fix, what I'm trying to do away with, that sort of thing. Whenever I go to speak in Wyoming, I do not talk in platitudes. But I was listening to Donald Trump, and he was engaging in an interview, and he was talking about a couple of things, and one of them was federalism and why our forefathers believed that the power should be with the states. Well, I challenge you to go back and look at even our Republican presidents and have them describe constitutionally why the power should be with the states and what our forefathers were trying to do and what that means and what federalism is. People talk about federalism all the time. They don't necessarily understand what it means or how it was to be carried out. I would argue, and people talk all the time about the 10th Amendment, and why don't we just enforce the 10th Amendment? My response kind of is because they also adopted the 16th and 17th Amendments. Mm-hmm. And the 16th and 17th Amendments are the ones that totally undermine states' rights, much more than anything we could do to the 10th Amendment, because they gave the federal government, number one, the ability to impose an income tax. Yep. And number two, they made U.S. senators elected by the popular vote rather than appointed by the states. So they took the states, they kicked them away from the table. So the only people that are at the table right now are the citizens and the federal government. The state doesn't have a seat at the table anymore because of the 16th and 17th Amendments, which those are the things that I think need to be fixed. That's a long time in the coming. But what was interesting was to listen to him. Somebody actually, he had actually figured out and talked about and could engage in an intelligent conversation as to why, under our form of government, the power should be with the states and not here in Washington, D.C.
And the best example that he has come up with, at least in my mind, is the discussion I watched when he was talking about the Dobbs decision. And he said, look, this was never intended to be a federal government issue. And in fact, our founders probably wouldn't have been ever in favor of it anyway, but that power is left up to the states. It's not specifically mentioned in the Constitution. It's not one of the enumerated powers. And to just hear him describe why it's important that the Supreme Court ruled that, okay, the states have to decide that one. I mean, I think that the media tends to, and I know that the media tends to try to portray Donald Trump in sort of a cartoonish way, and portray him as not having any depth, not being able to discuss any of these issues. But I think when you look at how he understands the normal people like you and me, and the people that go to work every day and have to provide for their families, but he also understands the big constitutional issues like the ones you mentioned, federalism, the 10th Amendment. I mean, he really is a well-rounded guy.
Well, he is. And the thing about the Dobbs decision that the Democrats are failing to understand is that they didn't say one way or the other on the issue of abortion. They said that's for the states to decide. But if you, again, believe in our form of government and you believe in our republic and you believe that the best form of government is one that is closest to the people because it's going to be more responsive, more reactive, more accountable, then the Dobbs decision, whether the rationale of the Dobbs decision can be applied to management of streams and rivers. It can be applied to who gets to make the decision about cattle crossing state lines. I mean, it applies to so much. It applies to how we're going to educate our young. Those are all state issues. So if you can take a step back and not focus specifically on the fact that it is about abortion and the obsession that the Democrats have had with that over the last 50 years, the Dobbs decision only rebalances the relationship between the state and the federal government, but more importantly, between the individual and government. That's really what it did. And again, I think that he gets that because he understands federalism. So it is, it's been interesting to watch. And just over the last week, what we've learned, he's got some great appointments in the works. Elise Stefanik is a great friend of mine. Her going up to the UN and being able to be our voice there is going to be an absolute incredible boon. I have been talking to her about why national security is energy security and energy security is national security and what role Wyoming will play in that and why it's so important for her to push back against the UN on all of this crazy global warming and climate change stuff. We've got a direct tie into the UN now that we've not had before, and that is just absolutely incredible. I'm very excited about that. Mike Waltz, I don't think you'll find a better expert when it comes to military issues than Mike Waltz out of Florida. Again, great friend of mine, absolutely brilliant, absolutely a dedicated father and patriot that is going to do a great job in leading us on national defense and security issues.
Well, and I think the big difference between this term in office and the first time is now he knows where all the snakes are hiding. I mean, quite literally. And, you know, he can hit the ground running and knows that he can't take just anybody's suggestion on who to put in office where, because our one of your favorites, Christopher Wray, that mistake's not going to happen again.
Well, it better not. I can't believe you just said that name to me. That just hey, what? So yesterday I did get to spend a little bit of time with Mayorkas and those guys.
Oh, how is he?
I didn't really get to talk. Well, when he saw me, I thought that he was going to get sick to his stomach. But so I didn't really have an opportunity to visit with him. But I attended the incredible veterans ceremony at the National Cemetery yesterday, and obviously it was all the generals and all the cabinet secretaries and things. And I was sitting in the same box as Mr. Mayorkas, but I didn't have a chance to talk to him, and I was good. There were several things I did want to say, but I didn't. I held my tongue. But I'm pretty excited to get rid of those people, to get rid of Kirby, Mayorkas, Christopher Wray, Merrick Garland, the people who have just driven this country into the ground over the last 4 years.
Oh, and I think that there are, this is my own personal opinion, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people probably agree with me that President Biden's not been in control for quite some time, and it's the people in cabinet positions like Mayorkas who have really done a tremendous amount of damage to this country. And I mean, the faster we can get him out of there, and I think that his choice for border czar was it Homan. I mean, I think that's a great idea.
It is a great idea. It is. Yeah, and he'll work well with the people that he needs to work with in Texas, Arizona, the border states. Yeah, very, very great choice.
All right, so I've got a couple of questions from a few listeners, and I'm hoping you've got an update for us. So one of my listeners wants to know what the status of Utah's lawsuit against the feds is.
Well, it hasn't changed. So what that is that is a petition to the United States Supreme Court. The Supreme Court obviously doesn't typically act as a trial court, but under our Constitution in very specific situations, it does. So you as a party have to petition the Supreme Court to even accept the case. Now, I personally don't believe that the Supreme Court has the constitutional authority to turn them down, but the Supreme Court disagrees with me on that. I think 3 of the justices agree with me, like Thomas and Alito. Both of them agree with me that this isn't whether they take it, it is that they have to take it and decide it. But they have rejected petitions in the past, so we're still at the petition stage. So the state of Utah has filed a petition for the Supreme Court to accept the case, and then if they accept the case, at that point they file the complaint, and then it goes forward like a regular case where you would have discovery and you would get documents and you would exchange information. You would make legal arguments to the court. Now, how much discovery would be necessary in a case like this? I don't know if I know the answer to that, although I think that going back into the historical record much deeper may honestly be helpful here, because, again, I don't believe that our forefathers ever imagined that the federal government would own 612 million or 640 million acres of land. I think, again, going back to our earlier discussion, they always intended that it would be the states that would have the power and the authority. And also keep in mind, in the Constitution, they have what's called the Equal Footing Clause, and that is that each state that was admitted to, each territory that was admitted to the Union, they were to become a state on equal footing as the other states, so that there was no imbalance in power. That's why most of your states are approximately the same size geographically, except out west, because they were more arid and they had fewer people.
Right.
But that's why also California is such an anomaly. California never probably should have been allowed to remain the size that it is, because it has created an unequal footing with the rest of the country just because of its pure size and population, and that was not intended. There's supposed to be more equality between the states than that. So it is up to the Supreme Court whether they accept it. If they accept the petition, there will be a lot more briefing. If they reject the petition, then Utah is going to probably have to go back to the drawing board and see if there's another way to convince them to address this issue.
Now, I've talked to a lot of people on this issue, and it always comes back to, well, Wyoming should do the same thing. But a question that I don't think I've ever asked you is, in our Constitution, it pretty much says that we give up all claim to federal lands in Wyoming. So this petition with the Supreme Court, is that something that could even be applied to Wyoming, or because that phrase is in our Constitution, does that preclude any of that?
Well, it depends. And I think that that's what's going to come down to the interpretation, because other states have the exact same provision in their constitutions. Wyoming is not unique in that regard. And so what it is I think that there's a conflict. There's a challenge between that provision and what, again, the federal Constitution intended and what the Equal Footing Clause and that sort of thing requires. I also would like to gather more information as to what exactly that particular paragraph means. What is the legislative history of it? Why did they say it the way that they said it? Because the fact is, there have been circumstances where additional land has been transferred to the state of Wyoming. And so I think that warrants additional legal analysis. I don't have a definitive answer for you, and I don't think that there's one that's available yet. I think we need more information to determine that, and then we'll have to decide. But, I know that sounds like a lawyer answer, but that's because you're asking me a legal question.
It's because I'm talking to a lawyer.
Well, and I just don't think it's black and white the way that some people do. Some people think it's absolutely black and white, that all the land is to be transferred to the states, and other people have a different viewpoint on that. Now, one of the things I do want to make clear is that this lawsuit applies to certain BLM lands, not all categories of federal land. It is not applicable to the National Park Service lands. It is not applicable to National Forest Service lands. Should that be a battle down the road? Perhaps. But that's not the issue that is in front of the Supreme Court right now.
All right. Last question. Are you finally going to get your Grizzlies delisted?
Boy, I hope so. We're still working at it. They're supposed to come out with a new decision in January. The Fish and Wildlife Service. That's what they did when they kicked this can down the road in July. They're supposed to be ruling on Wyoming's petition. By that time, I think the petition will have been filed for 3 solid years. The Fish and Wildlife Service is required to act within 90 days initially, and then if they need additional time, they can take up to a year. So the Fish and Wildlife Service right now is in violation of the law, but we continue to work to get grizzly bears delisted legislatively, and then we'll see what happens in January. But it's definitely a priority for us. We've made it clear with this administration that that's a priority with us, and I think we'll be able to get it moving forward.
Well, I would hope so. Well, Harriet, I appreciate you taking the time to visit with me. Let's continue celebrating, but also let's make sure we keep our eye on all the bureaucrats too, because we don't want the same thing to happen that happened to Trump. Well, there you have it. The Harriet Hageman interview on the 750th episode celebration of Cowboy State Politics. That'll about do it for today's installment of the program. We'll catch up tomorrow and have some analysis of some of the things that Harriet talked about, as well as try to take your phone calls and see if you had any questions about it. But for now, from the base of the Bighorns on the 750th episode celebration on Cowboy State Politics, I'm David Iverson, and this is the one and only Cowboy State Politics.